Hello, peoples, and welcome to Esoterica Cinema, the program where we take films from the cinematic multiverse and discuss the hell out of them. My name is Jason Peters, and with me, as always, is the man who once got lost at sea for 87 days and returned with a soccer ball named Franklin as his best friend. That's right, Mr. Ryan Sebo.
What's up, Jason? How's it going, buddy?
Good. By the way, I was so jealous of that soccer ball, Franklin. I would just get him in headlocks and stuff when you weren't watching. Very jealous of your guys' relationship there. You guys were close.
I invited him on the show, but he was busy today, so you're in luck. You were my second choice, just know that.
I also like making really esoteric film references. It's Esoterica Cinema, right? Literally, it's right there in the title.
I mean, it was you, Spalding, Wilson's definitely
Wilson,
gone.
Of course, had the money, came
Franklin,
from the bougie family,
Franklin
right?
was there. Yeah, I mean, they were all...
They were all the second rates.
This guy knows about balls. Ball Club for Men. Go back and listen. Link below.
But we are not here to talk about old late 90s, early 2000s Tom Hanks films. No, we are here to talk about one of the most insane, wonderful films of all time in Mad Max Fury Road. Buddy, hit us up with that description.
Oh, man. Chef's kiss to this movie. This is one of your and my favorite films of all time.
Absolutely.
So much so that we found an excuse to just shimmy it on into our schedule. This is not supposed to be here as a full-length episode. We are going out of turn and just shimmying this in anticipation for the sequel Furiosa, that is, or the prequel rather, I should say, that is coming out in just a short bit of time whenever this releases. I'm not sure what our release schedule is going to be on this episode, but whenever it is, it should be very soon thereafter. So not only did we watch the movie Mad Max Fury Road from 2015, but we also took a deep dive into the behind-the-scenes book by Kyle Buchanan, Blood, Sweat, and Chrome, the wild and true story of Mad Max Fury Road. Absolutely bonkers behind-the-scenes tale here. Yeah. This is some Lord of the Rings style behind-the-scenes stuff. This was a movie that was, I didn't realize this, but was 20 years in the making. Google has this described as years after the collapse of civilization, the tyrannical Immortan Joe enslaves apocalypse survivors inside the desert fortress of the Citadel. When the warrior Imperator Furiosa, played by Charlize Theron, leads the despot's 5 wives in a daring escape, she forges an alliance with Max Rockatansky, played by Tom Hardy, our titular Mad Max, who we will talk a little bit about being a side character in his own movie. Is very interesting how they approach that. Fortified in the massive armored truck, the War Rig, they try to outrun the ruthless warlord and his henchmen in a deadly high-speed chase throughout the wasteland. Like I said, this came out May 15 of 2015. This was 20 plus years in the making and was made on a budget of 160 mil, brought in a box office worldwide of $380 million. So this was a success. It wasn't a blockbuster Avengers Endgame level success, but it was a success nonetheless. The way they made this movie was absolutely bonkers, like you were saying earlier. Can't wait to deep dive into this. The one thing I walked away from is that Tina Turner was wrong. We, in fact, did need another hero. Jason, I got to ask you, as always, buddy, what did you think about this movie? Though I already know the answer to that.
I was going to say, you well know what I think of this movie, and I'll be happy to tell everybody else what I think. But first, do want to remind you guys, if you're watching, please go ahead, like the video, subscribe to our channel. Really helps us out, right? As well, if along the way, as we're talking about the film, you feel like you want to chime in, let us know your thoughts on something we may have just said or about the movie in general. Please drop those thoughts down in the comments. We would love to hear from you, and we'll likely even get back. We read all of them personally, so we do appreciate what you have to say and want to encourage you to participate in these conversations. If you don't feel like doing it here, you can also go directly to our website, esotericacinema.com. We have a lot of resources there for you to contact us and a lot of other fun stuff there for you as well. So do go ahead and check that out. Now, Ryan, again, to your point, I love this movie. I absolutely adore this movie. I know that comes as no surprise to you. And look, to a little bit, this is sort of like the old Jim Gaffigan joke, right? Like, hey, did you guys see Heat? Like, what is it, 10 years after this movie's been released, 9 years? We're here, we're doing a review on it. Everybody who's watching this has probably already seen it. If you haven't, you've probably made a decision not to, right? So I would guess that if you're here there watching us, you love this movie just as much as we do. You want to sit here and gush at it and maybe even, have us take a look at and maybe point out some things about what is specifically driving the success of this film. And that's kind of what I'm looking forward to going into with you, Ryan, because it's one of the great things about the show, and especially about these longer episodes, is it not only gives us an opportunity, but in fact forces us to look at films in a much deeper perspective than we might otherwise. So there are things, I've seen this movie at least 10 times, probably a dozen, maybe even more, right? A lot of times. So there were times that just by sort of looking at it through this more critical lens, that I sort of noticed things about what was going on. And to your point, having a 10-hour audiobook that we both listened to, that certainly helps shed light on things as well, right? But yeah, even narratively and structurally, not just the BTS stuff, really picked up on some things that I didn't before. And so really looking forward to being able to maybe point some of those out. Maybe some of the people watching will pick up on some of those things that they didn't notice as well. So, but yeah, again, to your point, top 10 of all time.
This movie happens so fast. It's breakneck speed that it is hard to pick up on some of the narrative nuances like you're talking about. It's edited very fast. We're going to talk about some of the editing process here in just a bit. But yeah, it's such a bonfire, high-octane movie that it's easy to get caught up in the fast-paced action of it all and lose track of all of the love and care that these people went into their performances and the narrative structure and some of the story arcs and things that were happening to some of the ancillary characters and stuff like that. So it's definitely worthy of a deep dive. This was absolutely a crazy, crazy, crazy deep dive. I'm really glad that you got me into the book. You recommended this book to me. You said that you were going to do it in preparation for this show. I said, I'll jump on board for that. I've been on the road for quite a bit, and it is available on Audible for those out there that are interested in what we cover today, that want to do their own research or behind the scenes work. It's very, very entertaining and has a lot of heart to it. So definitely we're going to be referencing this book a lot. Definitely go back and get to that by Kyle Buchanan on Audible or in bookstores worldwide.
Yeah, definitely. And it is a novel as well, or at least a book rather. So you can pick it up on paperback or you can do the audiobook, whatever you're into. Just get on that book. It is amazing. Now, let's go ahead and, Ryan, let's just start as we do. Let me ask, and you know what, instead of that, I should have probably asked you where we should start.
Hey, man.
What do you think?
As always, I'm going to let you know we need to start at the beginning.
Right. That's where we're supposed to start. The beginning. You'd think by now I'd remember, but here we are.
Here we are.
So at the beginning of the film, we do get one of the film's lone sort of silent moments, or at least quiet moments, right? It opens with Max, played by Tom Hardy. He's looking across this grand desert vista as his low, gruff narrative begins, right? The narration and voiceover that we're hearing. His voice is like as gravelly as all of the sound around him, right? And it's interestingly, in addition to being one of the film's quiet moments, it's also one of the only times that we get just a blatant CGI creation that's right there calling attention to itself in the little two-headed gecko that's running around. Obviously, Max will go ahead and stomp that with his foot, grab it, and eat it. So we're kind of initially showing the violence and the nature of this wasteland that we're living in, right? And also immediately he gets into his nearby car, revs the engine. The camera does some very fast push-ins. He takes off down a dune. After a brief pause, we then see him being chased by several other vehicles worth of what we will learn are war boys. And it doesn't take long before he is caught by them, dragged by chains back to the Citadel, which is where the war boys live under the oppressive rule of our main antagonist, the delicious Immortan Joe, played by Hugh Keays-Byrne, who just laps up every second of screen time in this grandiose, villainous fashion. Great antagonist here. And what we also see is that Max is haunted by visions of the children and adults that he failed to protect, who I believe will likely are supposed to be maybe the children from Beyond Thunderdome, which I can't say that I've actually watched all the way through. I need to go back and check that one out. And we also learn that all of the war boys suffer from a specific form of cancer that results in a premature death. Probably likely before 30 or 40. And so, not only does that create a scenario where these basically kids are willing to die on the battlefield for their ruler because they just don't have that much time as it is, but it also creates a scenario where they will use healthy human as what they call blood bags to transfer healthy blood into their body that has this cancerous blood and what have you. And this is to become Max's fate with our one particular warboy that we're going to follow along the way named Nux, played by Nicholas Hoult. So Ryan, that's kind of just like our setup and intro to this world. It's done very quickly, right? A lot of this stuff isn't necessarily like called attention to. It's just sort of put out there. I think the film does this a lot, which is great. It creates this lore behind the scenes, but then doesn't feel like it needs to weigh you down with that exposition. It just sort of trusts that if you like it, you're going to go more into that. But the first thing that I wanted to get into, because this is a very visual film, is both the cinematography and the visual language of the film, right? So I'm sure you have a lot of info on sort of like some of the technical equipment used by cinematographer John Seale, as well as some, interesting stories about him and what he was doing at the time, and look forward to learning more about that. But would also like to know and discuss specifically how George Miller handled the visual direction, specifically the fact that, for anyone watching who didn't know this, there was no screenplay or shooting script for this movie. One of the things that we learned through the book is that they pretty much had just a series of storyboards. So craziness on top of craziness on top of craziness here. Let's just talk about the visuals, cinematography, visual direction. I know there's a lot to talk about, but where would you start with your response to that?
Yeah, that is a loaded topic, my friend. I'm not sure where you want me to...
Strap in, kids. It's going to be about half an hour until we get to the next topic here.
Right, yeah. So because this movie took so long to make, this was an idea that George Miller had, like I said, 20 years prior to the film's release. So there was a lot of shuffling the deck of crew and cast and casting and is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen? Do I take this job? Charlize Theron adopted a kid. We're going to talk about all those things too down the road. But visually speaking, yes,
the
you're
Fury
right.
Road.
Oh God.
You're welcome. All of you.
So Dean Semler was supposed to be the cinematographer for this. He dropped out. It just got to be too much. And he was not going to go out into the Namibia desert and do this. So then we get John Seale, who jumps in, and he's an older gentleman at the time. He's, I believe, in his 60s when he makes this film. George Miller was also 67 when they went to go make this film. All these like crazy old Aussie dudes like out in the middle of the African desert for months on end making this. It was a very ballsy approach to making a movie. But even more so was the fact that, like you said, there's no screenplay for this. Script was only written out in absolutely necessary parts where there's a few breaks of monologuing where they needed to work that out. But otherwise, it was all done through storyboards, which created a tremendous problem because then whenever any changes were made, if you think about it, they got hundreds of storyboards just plastered all over the walls in this pre-production room, this war room, for lack of a better term. And, think of it just like comic book panel after comic book panel. So then when they decide, for example, Immortan Joe was bald in the beginning, or Charlize Theron, we're going to give her Furiosa a mechanical arm. Well, now they can't just like change that in the script like you would normally mechanical arm, clickety-clack. In Microsoft Word or whatever. Now you've got to go through
arm with mechanical arm. Okay, cool. Really, we're done. 5 minutes, done.
Correct. Now you've got to go through and redraw all of these comic book panels. So the graphic designer, absolutely losing their minds throughout the process. Every time George Miller got a wild hair up his ass to go change something along the way, it would be cool. They're like, no, don't do it.
No. Please stop, sir. Please no more.
Right. Something that I'll toss back to you is that this was originally planned and scripted to be a black and white film. And George Miller wanted this to stand out against his previous work, against other work of dystopian futures that was always so bleak and desaturated, films like Blade Runner and stuff like that. He wanted this to kind of be its own thing and take what he had already kind of established with the first 3 Mad Max films to another level. And so he was going to make this black and white. When that wasn't working out and the studio was against it, he decided, well, if it can't be black and white, we're going to make this eye-bleeding, hyper-saturated fucking color. So, and so he did. He filmed this and just boosted all the colors like crazy and created a whole trend of this orange and teal movement that really kind of took off around this time. I myself am guilty of using these, what are called LUTs or color filters when you're making films to really boost your oranges and your teals. It changes all your blues to like a teal color. And it was all kind of started here with Mad Max Fury Road, or at least this was the film that popularized that movement.
Sure.
I think there was a LUT called like the M71 LUT or something like that. And I used that religiously for like a whole year and a half, thinking like, oh, my shit looks cool, just like Mad Max. It was a whole trend. So it's like, bro, you're filming a soap commercial. Like, get over yourself. So,
and just to interject real quick for anybody that doesn't know, a LUT is on the back end of things. So this is a post-production
it's a color
term.
filter you add to your footage to get a certain
Correct,
look. It stands
it's
for
not like a
lookup table.
physical piece that you attach to a camera or anything. So don't go like looking for like, Sony PX whatever LUT, right? It's on the editing in your Adobe Premiere, your Logic, what have you.
Yeah, I mean, notoriously, when you shoot in what's called log footage, which for those that don't know is a desaturated footage that just shoots flat. It allows you to maintain all your information in your highlights and darks. So it kind of like flattens the image and compresses it and lifts all your blacks and then compresses all your highlights. And it gives you a very flat image. And then you bring all that contrast back in post-production with what are called colored LUTs. And they created some special ones for this film. And then they kind of got out to the public or, different versions thereof. And all of a sudden, everybody's shit for a year and a half looked like Mad Max Fury Road. And it was dope. It was a great time.
Yeah, it wasn't a bad thing. That was like this whole, the whole recent movement with colored gels recently, right? That I know was kind of hackneyed for a long time. And then but I'm like, dude, I fucking love this shit. Like, give me as much of it as possible. And then just kind of caught on for a minute. And then everything had these like completely unnecessary colored gels all over the place that I was just loving in like A24 films and such. And I feel like it got a little played out because I'm kind of seeing that aesthetic go away already. It was kind of short lived, but loved it while it was here. And I will continue championing that look.
Sure.
So because I had seen it so many times, Fury Road, this time, I actually ended up watching the black and chrome edition, which, by the way, huge missed opportunity not calling it the shiny and chrome edition.
Right.
Shame on you, Warner Brothers, or whoever greenlit that. Like, I get it. You're trying to do black and white, and instead it's black and chrome. But, like, shiny and chrome is the way to go.
It's right there. Yeah. It's right there.
Low-hanging fruit, man.
You were so close.
Yeah, so I did watch that this time, and it was an interesting experience. I won't say, first of all, I didn't lose anything. I will say that I did prefer the colored version just because that's my personal aesthetic, right? Like, I do like that really hyperkinetic, oversaturated, everything jacked up to 11 on the color palette kind of look, you know? And so you do miss out on that. What I will say was really interesting is you did pick up some newer presentations, right? And specifically what I mean by that is there's some sort of like frame rate fuckery that they do that doesn't really like call attention to itself per se. But there's times where they're sort of like they'll increase the frame rate or the speed to sort of give it like just even more hyperkinetic sort of look and feel. And at times when during those sequences where like the war boys would be running, grabbing all their equipment, to see that in black and white with that sort of herky-jerky kind of presentation almost looked like those old 1930s black and white films where the guy was like cranking the reel, and so sometimes the speed would go up or down, and there's just a specific type of movement to those old silent films in black and white that isn't, really... It's not done anymore. So it was almost like there are certain sequences that almost felt like they were shot in like the 30s or 40s or something. So that was super interesting. You do miss...
I mean, on those old film cameras, you actually, in many of the cases, you could ramp manually because you have a motor that's spinning the film through the film gate. And so you get it down to 24 frames per second that the frame, is going through the gate and exposing each cell of film that you're doing. But then you can literally crank that motor, and it's called, ramping. And you could ramp up the speed or slow it down for, different variable frame rates. And so, the fact that you could do that digitally. We're going to get into all this, but also to touch on the cinematography, we were kind of touching on this, but this is it's also good to remember this was kind of the dawn of the digital film movement. Arri Alexas had just come out. They were building their own camera rigs prior to this. They had worked on them for 10 years on these 3D camera rigs. This was supposed to be shot in 3D. That was all the rage for a little while. I don't know if anybody remembers that, but all of a sudden 3D came back in a big way with Avatar and, some of these films. And then all of a sudden everybody wanted 3D. And it was a way that studios could all of a sudden charge you $10 more for a ticket too. So everyone was like, ooh, 3D. So everyone was salivating at the mouth to get that in there. And this was supposed to be one of those films. It ended up not being one of those films because the Arri Alexa came out and just put their cameras to shame. But it's worth mentioning. I mean, this is their trash cameras, or the cameras that they would mount on cars and meant to be destroyed, were Canon 5D Mark IIs, to kind of put this in a date and time. This is way back in the day. So the fact that they were doing variable frame rates and ramping and stuff like that the way they were was pretty revolutionary for its time. They were applying film concepts to digital, which was just starting to take shape.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It's also worth noting that the cinematographer, John Seale, as you mentioned, he's well into his 60s at this point. He was actually completely retired at the point that George Miller hit him up. And it wasn't until his previous guy bailed, because I think specifically he was like, George, I'm just too old to do this, man. Like, I can't be like throwing myself around here and there and everywhere, So he actually, so he decided like, and I think it was also because of the development hell time, right? Like, I'm sure when he signed on, it was 10 years prior. And it was one thing, but then, once he's out there in the desert and he's 60s and it's like, oh yeah, no, just hang off the side of that vehicle while we go 60 miles an hour, right? He's like, dude, like, I might fall down the stairs, homie. Like, I don't think you realize. So he bailed, and then they calls this guy John Seale, who had shot some of his earlier films. And this guy was actually pretty well known because he won an Oscar for The English Patient. He shot The English Patient. And he had done a number of other films too. He shot Rain Man, Dead Poets Society. He's George Miller's guy. So even recently so Fury Road was the second to last film he shot. And then he came back to do 3,000 Years of Longing with George Miller as well. And then I think he tapped out because he's not shooting Furiosa from what I understand. Did you see that? I did. Yeah, it was surprisingly good. It's a very sort of small film. Okay. So, but yeah, no, I really enjoyed it. And part of it too is just, I love Idris Elba, right? As everybody does. Same with Tilda Swinton. So putting the two of them together and then giving George Miller a camera and, his art department and everything. It's not like one of those like all-time classic films, but a solid movie, solid 4 out of 5 stars. I enjoyed it. Yeah, it
looked super trippy. I really want to see it. I never got around to it. I did see that it got, kind of tepid reviews. And so that was kind of a bummer, but it is on my watch list. I want to get to it.
No, it was interesting. I will say the first half is stronger than the second half, but still a solid movie for sure.
It looks like it had vibes of who's the dude that did The Cell and then The Fall?
Oh, Tarsum. Yeah, Tarsum Singh.
Thank you. Yeah, Tarsum Singh. Yeah, it looks like it has some Tarsum Singh vibes in there, but
a little bit.
Just in some of the trippiness. Yeah, I think they met on Lorenzo's Oil that Seale did for George Miller. So that was kind of a coming back to form a little bit for Miller, who had stepped away from things after some failures and tripping up and having a lawsuit against Warner Brothers and stuff like that. So he kind of came back to form with Lorenzo's Oil and got a lot of critical success with that and was able to move forward with his career. Babe and Babe 2. This guy's had we haven't even talked about that. This guy's had the most wild career of all time, George Miller.
Yeah. So. Also worth noting that this film likely does not happen without the creation and success of Happy Feet. If Happy Feet doesn't make $300 million and change, like he probably doesn't get the money to make this, which is hysterical.
From the maker of Happy Feet and Happy Feet 2 comes Mad Max Fury Road. Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah, definitely. So
I'll give you another one. I have not seen Babe 2, Pig in the City yet.
I never have either.
After listening to this audiobook, I really want to watch that because it sounds dark as fuck. Like everybody went there expecting this happy-go-lucky tale of Babe, and then they go watch Babe Pig in the City, and they're like, oh God. And so I'm like, oh, I kind of want to watch that.
Yeah, a couple interesting things of note here before we proceed, which is that firstly, with regards to the film being a financial success, according to the studio, it actually wasn't. And it to the point that it would actually create George Miller's second lawsuit with Warner Brothers over pay disputes. So, and now here's the thing. If you pay attention to Hollywood at all, you know that like Hollywood accounting is a thing, right? Like, I think like Fox has taken a loss on The Simpsons for all 35 years that it's been out. Taking a loss in air quotes, of course, right? So according to the numbers, this movie made $380 million roughly. And I believe after reshoots and going over budget, it was about 180 for production.
That's what I read too, yes.
Done. So according to Warner Brothers, they claim to have lost somewhere between 20 and $40 million when all was said and done. But if that's the case, that means you spent $200 million on marketing, or at least that's what I initially thought. And then I took a step back and I was like, oh, wait, you know what? I'll bet you that Charlize Theron and Tom Hardy and possibly even George Miller, likely even George Miller, probably had big back end participation at that point, right?
Sure.
So if you profit $200 million, but there's 35 points of that has to go to those three people. Now all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, like, I can see how you could technically lose money as a studio, even if the film made money because other people got paid out, but then like you ended up taking that loss,
Hey man, you're not getting my ass out into the African desert without for 8 months without some points on the back end. I'm gonna need some back end points for that 8 months in the desert.
Yeah. But it also stands to reason, like, what was the expectation there? Because this was the most wildly successful Mad Max film ever made by a huge stretch. And like, if you needed to make $500 million off Mad Max in 2015 to be profitable, what accounting led you to believe you would make $500 million on Mad Max in 2015? Very few films as a whole. I don't even think we had a film maybe Avatar had just crossed the $1 billion mark for the first time, right?
I think it sounds to me, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my take. I don't have any hard-lined numbers and accounting to back my theory up, but the whole story that we've heard from this book and the research that we have done, it sounds like because this took so long to make, this is, again, I referenced this in the beginning of the episode here, but this is very akin to Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, where it's almost like financial quicksand, because this was such a long string of yeses and nos from the studio that by the time you get to the end, yes, you've spent 180 million and you need to recoup 500. But that wasn't just like a deal they made on a Wednesday. Like this took like 10 years of yeses and nos and maybes and shimmying in. They also did a lot of renegade style filmmaking where they just fucking did this shit. They were supposed to go film this in Australia, and then they had record floods on location where they were supposed to film this. And then all of a sudden the whole area was lush and green for the first time in like a half a century. And so they're like, well, this doesn't look very Mad Maxy at all. There was like flowers everywhere. It was all beautiful and lush.
The locals were talking about how they had flowers pop up that they had literally never seen
considering
before
the whole
in their
catalyst of the
life.
film is water.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So then they had to go shoot it in the Namibian desert. And producer Doug Mitchell notoriously put all these battle cars and war rigs and all these things on a shipping boat and just shipped it over to Africa. And then the studio was like, well, we got to figure this out. We'll work on a location. We'll get back to you. And then Doug Mitchell's like, no, I got it. We already shipped these shits over to Africa. And they're like, wait, what? You can't, what? You're going to do what now? You're going to go film this? And how long is it? And then he's like, don't worry about it, mate. We got it, and everything is fine. So, a lot of renegade style filmmaking was done on this too, where I think they just kind of took shit into their own hands, and the studio was up against a wall because it was like in for a penny, in for a dime kind of deal. They were already pot committed. So once you get down the road a certain length and you've got this whole tent city of thousands of people living in the middle of the desert, filming this thing for months, you kind of have the studio bent over a barrel a little bit. And there's a lot of wild stories. We'll get into that here shortly. I'm not going to go too far down the road with that, but I honestly think there was some of that too, where it wasn't like the studio was like, okay, how much do you need? 180 million. Okay, carry the one, blah, blah, blah. And no, I think it was more like, how much did we spend? 180 million. What the fuck? So
yeah, no, dude, George Miller's a hustler, man. Like when it comes to like spending money, like I totally get some of
And
the
Doug
strife
Mitchell.
that he's had with
Credit where
studios,
due.
the two of them. Yeah, true. Because they just do shit, right? It's like if like, you know, your kid asks for your credit card because they're going out to the mall and you're like, okay, but you know, keep it under $50. And then like 3 days later, you check your statement and it's like $500 was charged
Right.
across 7 stores. And you're like, what happened? You're like, you gave me your credit card. You said I could use it at the mall. I still
That
didn't
got
keep it under
wildly out of
50.
hand.
It's like, well, yeah, but then I got there and then I really wanted this, but then there was a great deal. It would have been
Right.
dumb not to spend the money, see?
Sure. Yeah.
So like, yeah. So again, to your point, it's like, oh, hey, yeah, no, we want to get some cars over to Africa. All right, well, let's discuss that. Oh, no, we already did it. It's 100 cars and $2 million. What?
Well, and even to the point that when they were out in Africa and they were filming, studio representatives were panicked about this. There was, at the time, Warner Brothers was going through a bit of a regime change, if you will, with their president and all their leadership. And so the head of Warner Brothers at the time was sending representatives out there to go check on this film because this was getting wildly out of hand and nobody knew what these people were doing. They were filming it out in the middle of Africa. So it's not like they were on a back lot or a studio system somewhere. It took quite a bit of trial and tribulation to even get to set. And so they kept sending representatives out to go check on these folks and see what the hell was going on out there. And they would always pawn them off on the assistants. And this one guy in particular, they were talking about in the book, Shyam Yadav, that they affectionately called Toast. Because he was a part of something that he dubbed the French Toast Connection or French Toast Crew. And he would like make French toast for everybody. That was like his big love language of sorts. It's who Zoe Kravitz's character was named after in the film as Toast. But because she really grew to love this guy and he was such a cool dude. But he was like he was a visual effects guy that had come up on movies like Twister and Congo. But he loved Mad Max. That was his favorite movie. So this was a dream of his to work on this. But he was just kind of like a hanger-on. In fact, if you look up his credits on IMDb, you go down the list, and he's worked on movies since then like Sam Raimi's Spider-Man and Venom and like all these crazy movies. But then you get down to Mad, and he's like, everyone's like visual effects, data transfer, visual consultant. And then you get down to Mad Max and it just says Toast on IMDb. I shit you not. And that's who they would pawn the studio people off on. They're like, yeah, get in the car, we'll fill you all in or whatever. And then these studio execs all dressed up and buttoned up nice in their suits get in and then Toast is like, hey, mate, how you doing? And they're like, what's going on here? It's like, hey, we're filming a movie, eh? And then that was the end of that. It was great. Fucking Toast.
Nice, man. Yeah. So as we get back to the film, we soon learn that Immortan Joe's right-hand man, who is actually in this case a woman, is none other than Imperator Furiosa, played by Charlize Theron. I will apparently be calling her Theron, and Ryan will be calling her Theron. If you know how it's pronounced, drop it in the comments.
Yes.
And after being set off in the aptly named War Rig to trade crops for gas and ammo with the populations of the creatively titled Gastown and Bullet Farm, respectively, George Miller does not know the phrase on the nose. He's never heard of that one before. Just like the War Boys, right? So Furiosa immediately veers off course, wherein the War Boys are sent after her with the assistance of the rulers of Gastown and Bullet Farm. And also, since Nux, at this point, they're all sort of like leaving to go, and Nux hasn't finished his transfusion with Max the body bag yet. And so he's refusing not to take part in this big chase. So he comes up with the grand idea to go ahead and attach his blood bag, Max, to the front of his vehicle as he is going to go out there, setting up this scenario for this entire first chase where the seeming protagonist of our movie, Max, is basically just strapped helplessly to the front of a vehicle. And also interesting to note that as far as most of this film is concerned, Furiosa is the protagonist when it comes to arcs, when it comes to defeating the villain. It's really kind of funny that this really isn't Max's movie. It's kind of more Furiosa's movie.
Right.
And Ryan, that leads me into our sort of next discussion, right? Which I want to discuss the nature of story and character in this film, right? I sort of teed up at the top that it's easy to dismiss this film as just sort of a series of chase sequences with no real story elements or plot points or character development built into it. And what we see when we start to analyze that is that that's actually a very incorrect statement. A lot of that really is there. It's in there very intentionally. And we're going to look at why that is and the way that they sort of achieve that. And I think that the thing that stood out to me the most, like I said at the top, seen this movie a dozen times or so, and I never really noticed Max's evolution. I think in the past, I always sort of considered it fairly like one note, like more of a supporting arc, like not too much there. But I think that's just because of Max's disposition, right? His disposition is very sort of gruff and to himself, and that doesn't really change. But the way that he interacts with the world very much changes over the course of the film. And so, like, this time around, I was really taken aback by how damaged Max was at the beginning of this film, right? Like he's played as though he's completely feral, basically. Like he's this isolated creature that's just wandering the desert and, is racked and consumed by guilt to the point that he's haunted by visions. And in fact, even for the first third of the film, we see that like he can't even communicate with other humans in words with traditional language. Like he just speaks with like these sort of wild eyes and gestures. And instead of saying, grab me, that he like, moves the gun over and like sort of points with them and points at stuff. So it was really interesting to note that he doesn't have a lot of dialogue in the first half of the film, and he's all just communicating with body language and these violent expressions, much in the way a feral animal would,
Yes.
And that was really interesting this time.
I agree. Yeah. Narratively speaking, a couple things here. And I wanted to ask you about this. So something that I noticed that I didn't really pick up on is that though this is an isolated story, it's also a situation that without really any explanation or backstory, you're kind of thrust into the middle of a story. Like you're saying, your titular protagonist, Mad Max, is dealing with PTSD. He's obviously apparently lost what I'm only assuming is his wife and daughter.
Correct.
And they don't explain it in the film. He's being haunted with visions of her.
That's in the very first Mad Max is where that happens.
Correct.
And so everything just kind of assumes that. Takes that for granted. Yeah.
But because this is a kind of a different version of that, that tale, it kind of stands alone. Like you could watch this movie without having seen the others, and just kind of like go along for that ride. But you're right. He's just completely feral, kind of grunting along and pointing at things and that's his character arc, is his dealing with his grief and putting the past behind him so that he can move forward with his life and go do whatever it is he's going to do with this next tale. But you watch a film like this, and it's obviously an action film. There's, the car races and all the violence and the guns and the dystopian weapons and all the coolness, even the doof warrior. We'll get to that here shortly.
Everyone loves the doof warrior.
Absolutely. The guitar playing doof warrior that's, leading the charge. But, I have to ask myself, because this is such a unique visual experience, audible experience, viewing experience as a film goer, that what makes this different? Like, why is this different than Fast and the Furious, for example, that also has the cars and the adrenaline and all the unrealistic action and, crazy car chases and all of this. And the only thing I could derive is that Fast and the Furious, I wanted to get your thoughts on this. I'll pass back to you.
Okay.
Fast and the Furious was a studio film, and it was made to feel more heroic and polished. And this is more of a big budget cult film. What are your thoughts on that? And do you think I'm onto something there, or can you see any differences from a movie like what makes this? Because it's obviously very different than Fast and the Furious, but something like that. What kind of makes this stand out to you?
Yeah, I mean, so the first is that it's just got an entirely different energy, right? And that's kind of what is most surprising to me, is I think that generally speaking, if you're going to do a $150 million studio movie, they're going to try to tamp down a distinctive filmmaker's natural inclinations to go weird with things, right? Because otherwise it's like, what happened famously with Taika Waititi recently, right? Where they just let him go full Taika on Love and Thunder, and then everyone was like, oh, this is way too much, like, and then now he doesn't work anymore and nobody likes him anymore. Like, he just fell off a cliff, right? So I think that generally speaking, there's a sort of idea that studios should insulate filmmakers from maybe some of their, I don't want to say lesser instincts, but maybe more self-indulgent instincts, right? And this movie is all George Miller just being completely self-indulgent from the standpoint of like, I don't care what the studios want. Like, I'm here to make this very specific vision. I'm not going to compromise on that. And in certain ways, that's great. Like, in certain ways, that's what makes this movie what it is. In other ways, I would argue that it was actually very troublesome, right? Like, one of the things we were talking about that blew both of our minds from the book was the fact that George Miller decided to shoot this film chronologically, right? Just straight through from beginning to end. Like,
yep.
Doing a chase scene and then like, okay, next chase scene. Nope, we're going to fly everyone back over here, do these scenes, and then we're going to fly back. And I still maintain that it's because he didn't have a screenplay. Because look, here's the thing. How many of the shots in this film is like a very similar looking car, screeching across the side of something? So if you have like a still of a car that's coming over, like, how do you know if that's from minute 3 or from minute, 96? And you have to keep everything in order. And so I think that like that's a huge part of like, but all of this makes the film what it is. Your question was what separates this from, a Fast and Furious type of film. And so, yes, it is the idiosyncratic nature of the filmmaker, largely first and foremost. Like George Miller's batshit crazy, and normally batshit crazy people don't get like $150 million, like I was saying with Taika Waititi, right? So that's first and foremost. As well, it's the entire nature of the lore, I think, and everything that went into that. Listening to how they came up with a lot of the backstories, it reminded me very much of like the world's most detailed and intricate D&D game, right? So, famously, it's like in D&D, there will be these sort of weapons, right? Or let's just even use like video games, right? Like a loot shooter, Borderlands or something, and the whole point is to like find these really powerful weapons, right? And then it's like, oh, you got the Cyborginator, right? And it's a sniper rifle that also shoots electricity. And, if you dig into it, there'll be lore behind, and it'll be like, yeah, this gun was created during the, Niflheim battle by blah, blah, blah corporation where this mercenary stole it and this and that. And so one of the things that, we'll learn when analyzing story is that when you give your characters and you give a lot of your plot and your props and everything, when you give those backstories, even if you don't actually put that information in the context of your story, your book, your movie, your what have you, just the fact that it's there gives an element of believability to it, right? Like if the actor is holding this half axe, half saw blade, and it's just a half axe, half saw blade, that's one thing. But if he's like, actor, I want you to come up with the backstory. How many battles have you been in? When did you almost die? And this weapon saved you from it, right? Where did you get it from? Who made it? How celebrated is it, right? Now it becomes a thing. And now it's like, that gives it a different shade, right? It's not just an implement. It's not just like any old random weapon. It's like, this is my weapon. This is my thing. I am bonded to this. And I think that so much of that with regard to the vehicles, the props and everything, that's what we're picking up on is all of the passion, all of the lore, all of the creation of everything that went into it. And I think that's coming through in the camera and that's what we're seeing.
No, I agree wholeheartedly. This is the difference between a child playing with action figures and just doing shit that feels cool at the moment. Or like you said, it's a great example of, kids getting together in a basement and playing Dungeons and Dragons, because now we're getting into the why of it all. And how does this work? And, you're creating a whole thing. There was also a butt ton of love that went into this by everybody that was involved. It wasn't and that's why I differentiated between being a big budget cult film versus a studio picture, because studio pictures to me are designed first and foremost to make money. And this was not necessarily designed to make money. This was just something that George Miller had to like get out of his head. And once he roped in his ragtag group of, followers, to create this, like everybody just sunk their teeth into this in the same way. And I'm going to continue to liken this to Lord of the Rings because it's the same way that Peter Jackson built Weta from the ground up to support Lord of the Rings. It's the same way that he went out 7 years prior to filming the first Fellowship of the Ring movie and started planting stuff and creating Hobbiton and all the little hobbit huts and stuff like that around the Shire. So, it feels like a tangible place you could go visit. It's alive. And you're exactly right. Like the lore behind every one of the war rigs, every one of the props, every one of the weapons. We learned in the book that as they were designing the props and the weapons in the film, each and every one of them had to have 3 purposes. That was the role. So they had to fit into this world too, because it's a world of, sparse resources. There's nothing out there. They barely even have water. Or gasoline or anything. So if you're going to be given something as an impoverished person or a war boy or whatever you are, whatever your role is in this apocalyptic wasteland, that's something you treasure. So if you have this beaten stick with a pointing end, that's going to open your food. That's going to kill people. That's going to protect your family. That could be a religious token or relic of some kind that you could hang up on a mantle. It could start fires and to keep you warm at night and all sorts of things. So every single thing had to live in this world and serve a purpose or a litany of purposes. So versus just looking cool. Anyway, I thought that, it's crazy because, again, going back to the very start of this conversation, you watch this film and it's so frenetic and so fast paced that all of this gets lost on you the first viewing. You're just like, holy crap, what did I just watch? That was crazy. And then you start to dig into this. That's why I really can't recommend this book enough. Everybody go read it or listen to it on your travels because it's just like one chapter after the next. You're like, holy crap. Like, I cannot believe what went into this because it's, you're seeing it all so fast paced. Some of these things are blink and you miss it, but it's like, pretty crazy. Anyways.
And on that point, one of the things that we mentioned just a little bit ago is the narrative structure that we picked up on that maybe we didn't earlier. And so really just seeing how the chase sequences are designed in terms of sort of being the 3-act structure that we see and being reflective of the development of the relationship between Max and Furiosa. So I didn't really pick up as clearly on this, though you kind of get the sense. But if you just really look at it, it's really obvious and very distinct where, there's 3 big, huge chase sequences that kind of represent the first, second, and third acts of the film. The first one is Max and Furiosa completely at odds with one another, fighting each other the entire time. And then the second one is them sort of reluctantly coming together and learning to look out for each other. And then the third chase is them, they've finally bonded. There's a relationship there, or at least feelings there. And so they're actively looking to support and save one another. So just the way that that's very distinctively done. And then as well, Max's personal trajectory also reflects that. Where in that first chase sequence, he's all just wild eyes and movement. In the second one, he's starting to open up and communicate a little bit. We start to see them, do a little bit of like synchronize, like, oh, I'll shoot this guy that's after you and you shoot this guy that's after me. We're starting to learn each other. And then by the third sequence, like he's just openly communicating and talking with people as a relatively normal human, as close to normal as Max Rockatansky can be. And so again, being able to see the specific nature of the structure was something that I didn't notice until this time around.
Max Rockatansky, by the way, perfect Flintstone name. I think that's like a great.
He would be like, I don't know, one of the animals that works with the pelican, right? Just sitting there hammering rocks like, it's a living.
It's a living, right. Yep.
Yeah, and then also just the way that they reveal the wives, right? Like we sort of, on our first viewing, we know that there's apparently these wives. They're sort of gone. They're apparently in the war rig. We kind of assume that they're like stashed away or hidden in that little thing at the end. And then all of a sudden, just halfway through one of the first chase sequence, Splendid, who's the pregnant wife, like all of a sudden comes out and like makes her way across the truck to like ask Furiosa something or whatever. And I thought that was like really, even now I was like, oh, that's a very surprising moment when you don't really know what's going on. And so George Miller's ability to sort of craft these narrative story points within these large action and set pieces is another part of why this might work, maybe where A Fast and the Furious is not quite as narratively satisfying, because in A Fast and Furious, the action set pieces are just that, action set pieces. Whereas in Fury Road, George Miller's like, they're action set pieces, but also I'm going to be communicating story along the way and character development along the way.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, I think that this was very akin to a film we discussed not long ago, RRR. Where we had a very similar discussion about those action set pieces as well, and SS Rajamouli's version of dealing with action versus some studio action pieces, and why that movie felt so much different. And this is another one of those examples that kind of showcases that you could inject heart and emotion and narrative advancement and so forth into these huge actions. Because ultimately, this movie almost entirely exists within action set pieces. So you have to be able to tell your story within the cab of the war rig. That was something that Charlize was, saying was very difficult for her, because she had to tell most of her story in the cab of a semi-truck, for most of the film. And that's a challenge.
Definitely.
From the waist up, just like no emoting, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like you can't use your body or do anything. Yeah, it's like this podcast, like just waist up. Here we are, just 2 hours. Watch us. Let's go.
Nothing but a medium shot for 2.5 hours. Go.
Right. Yeah. And go.
One aspect I also thought was really interesting, and it kind of touches on what I was saying earlier about how Max is like almost not the protagonist of this story from a traditional narrative point of view, which is that our antagonist gets a MacGuffin. Our seeming supporting character, who I would argue is actually the protagonist of the film, gets a MacGuffin, which are Immortan Joe and Furiosa, respectively. Again, just real quick for those that don't know, MacGuffin is basically the goal object of our protagonist, right? What is it that they are in search of, And so for Furiosa, obviously, she's trying to find the green place and save the people, the wives, that is, and get them there. For Immortan Joe, he's trying to get his wives back who have been stolen from him. Max, just trying to survive. Yeah. Not in pursuit of anything. He's no
really
goals,
an ancillary character.
Literally just there as these things happen, trying not to die. That's it.
Yeah.
So once again, very interesting to have a Mad Max movie where Max is not the protagonist and in fact has no MacGuffin and is just there trying to survive. Really interesting.
He's got no blood in the game, pun intended. He just finds himself at the wrong place at the wrong time consistently, and has to, in serving his own purpose, his quest kind of aligns with Furiosa's. So, there becomes this overlap in the Venn diagram, and they decide to help each other out. And then through that, they form a bond, and then, they go through their own, character arcs to really kind of, grow to appreciate each other. I can't even say they like each other by the end, but they at least tolerate each other with love and kindness.
I think they respect each other. They love each other like siblings that fight all the time, right? Like we care about each other, but like we're also not gonna be in the same room if we can help it.
You're a good one. Yeah, you're a good egg. In a world full of bad eggs, you're a good egg. So but I'm gonna go my way and you're gonna go yours in the end, which ends up happening. Real quick, we're scooting along here. The plot for this movie is very, very easy. I do think we should kind of tee up what's happening at this point, because we have done so much research on this film, it's going to be very, and then this, and then that, along the way. But just so everybody is kind of understanding, without giving away too many spoilers about the film, Immortan Joe, our enemy, our ultimate bad henchman boss, is controlling the water for these lands in a desolate wasteland. The people depend on him for everything. He is a dictator, a fascist, and controls people. And he also has taken on a series of concubines or brides, if you will. He would call them his wives, against their will. And he's holding them, torturing and raping them to have siblings and create his legacy. This is another one of those films we watched where these people want a pure bloodline and to continue their dictatorship through kin. So he is, he's got these women, these young girls captive and locked up. Furiosa was taken away from her land. We're going to find her story out more in the prequel coming out shortly. But yeah, this is all about Charlize, or Furiosa rather, taking these, the brides of Immortan Joe away from him, rescuing them and taking them to what she knows as the Green Land. And so that, which is like a land of water and it's lush and they could survive there. So,
and that's where she was raised as well among the,
correct.
The women of
she has
the
memories
tribe.
of this being a paradise of sorts. And so she's like, if I could just get there, there's enough people there that can protect me. I do believe it's a land mostly consisting of women, that
correct. Yeah. It's entirely women. Yeah.
Entirely women that, are all looking out for each other. So she's like, let me get these women out of here. It will both devastate Immortan Joe, ruin his lineage, and save these girls, and I could, take them to the green place. So, so this whole thing is just entirely her. It basically fires when you talk about Nicholas Hoult, getting his blood bag, Max, on the hood of his car. They're chasing after Charlize, who has snuck these girls out in this big, huge semi-trailer full of guzzling called the War Rig. And they're going across the desert or the wasteland to get to the Greenland. And so that's pretty much the entirety of the film, is just saving these girls. Yeah. And then Max crosses paths with Charlize as he escapes from Nicholas Holt's car and all of that, Nux's car. So anyways, I just thought I would kind of tee that up because, we're kind of getting away from the narrative, but that's it. Like, that's the whole plot. They get to the, they get to the green place. They find out it wasn't all that, it's actually ruined too. It's fucked. And then they've got to end up going back, and we'll get there. But, that's the crux of the whole action, series of action sequences along the way.
Correct. Yeah. And our first chase through the desert is quite a spectacle. We see everything done in real life, real time, practical effects, real engines, real vehicles across a real desert. And this is all just something that, you haven't really seen before in any other movie done to this sort of degree. It's combined with this flamboyant post-apocalyptic flair, right? This sort of madcap Aussie energy. So it's sort of just a shake and bake of ingredients that individually you've seen elsewhere, but none have been put together quite like this specific recipe, and fair to say probably never will again, especially when it's not going to make a ton of movie and it's as difficult, like to go through all of that, imagine going through all of that for 20 years of your life and your project gets made and it's awesome, but it doesn't make a dime and it in fact loses money. Like, that's kind of dispiriting. Obviously nobody wants that, but it's still just wonderful that we have the film. And, we also did want to touch with, we've got the whole charge of this entire huge army led by this doof warrior, right? And it's just a perfect encapsulation of everything about this film. Everybody loves this character. He's the guy who plays the giant guitar who's suspended by bungees and the flames erupt from the top when he plays it, right? And it's so funny because when you take a step back, this is like this civilization's and this army's version of the bugler, right? From like the old Independence Wars, right?
Or the fife boy and the drummer boy that lead the charge, right?
Yeah. So obviously we've come a long way from that. I still don't, for as slavishly devoted as realism to that Miller was for this, the one thing I do want to ask him is, where did all the electricity for these guitars come from, sir? Because you were very like, everything has to work, but like they don't seem to have electricity. That's why all of the war boys are moving the gears and everything's very manually done. So possible logistical inconsistency there. Possibly even the only one.
Onboard generators. Yeah. I
Which
don't know.
fine, but show us those, But anyway, so
Yeah.
we see Max again. He's strapped to the Nux's car. He's feeding him his blood, and this is when the giant electrical sandstorm arrives, right? And so Furiosa, she's driving the war rig and just plows its giant size directly into this storm. Obviously, the war boys all want to die on battlefield in the, glory of battle, because they're going to die when they're 26 anyways. So a number of them just pursue her into this storm, despite the fact that they just get swept up in the tornado like Dorothy and Toto in half of a moment, right? Like, if you're hanging off the side of a vehicle, probably going to get swept up in that storm. But hey, again, they're trying to die for the glory on battlefield. But Max is able to free himself before Nux does so and restrains Nux, and they end up sort of like crashing into the desert as the war rig progresses. And it's not too much longer until they're going to wake up the next day and go back and find that war rig. So one of the things that I did want to ask you about is the war boys themselves, right? So we've kind of talked about the vehicles. We haven't really mentioned, by the way, that as far as the vehicles were concerned for the creation of them, they basically took a giant warehouse and a giant junkyard, put them next to each other, and then invited like some of like the most interesting mechanics from across the world to basically come over and just play mad scientist and be like, hey, we got these cars, we got this junkyard, want to make these changes. See what you can do. Just the only stipulation is it's got to work. And then after you make it work, any sort of changes you make or whatever, you just justify them through story, right? So if you think it's cool to like add this scratch on the side of the car, justify it. Where did it come from? What battle did it happen in? Give it that lore, So I imagine that being, and they even mentioned in the book, right? Like a lot of these mechanics, they're just like surly guys working on cars and, just whatever. And then all of a sudden, for a year of their life, they get to go and just like play make believe with vehicles and not have to spend any money and everything at their disposal.
Yeah. Some of them said they even felt guilty that, because they use vintage cars for a lot of these things. So for cars from the 50s and 60s and hot rods and stuff like that. And it's like, I almost felt guilty chopping these things up and sending them to their final resting place. They have 50, 60 years of storied history, actual functional vehicles. And then we're just going to butcher these things and send them out to the Namibia desert to go get blown up. If only the original owners knew, when they bought this thing off the lot in 1957, honey, get the kid in, and it's just a nice little Ozzie and Harriet suburban 1950s McCarthy era lifestyle, straight out of Pleasantville. Cut to Tree Road, same car. The storied history and lineage of these cars and where they started, where they ended up. Pretty crazy.
Yeah. And again, same thing that we see with the weapons where, these prop masters were brought in and it's like, hey, go out of the junkyard and, find a saw and attach it to a tomahawk and, throw some old random little whistle you found there. Anything you can find, you can go ahead and make it. The only stipulation is just you can't special order something because your mind thought of it. We want you to approach creating these props, these weapons, etc., as though you really were in the wasteland where it's just a matter of everything is found, right? You don't have access to anything other than whatever you find along the way. So we're going to ask you to inhabit that same mentality. Once again, something that distinguishes this film from another film that might be similar-ish in DNA, but as far as the war boys themselves are concerned. So I thought it was really interesting to note that, these guys are obviously largely stuntmen. A lot of them are Aussie. They don't have traditional acting backgrounds. And I think that the one thing that resonated with me the most was just seeing how much George Miller and also Keys Byrne was able to get this sort of like character buy-in from a lot of these stuntmen, right? They would talk about how oftentimes on set, that sort of cultish, fetishistic worship of Immortan Joe that all the war boys had, like that would almost just sort of feel like it was really happening because he was trying to bring a method energy to it, so they talk about how he would come to show up on set and, jump on the loudspeaker and be like, "Daddy's home, boys, time for a nursery rhyme," and would literally tell them all a nursery rhyme. And then when he would finish, they would all give the V8 sign or whatever and scream Immortan, and he would like bask. And to the point that I think I remember saying like, the wives, the actresses that played the wives were like a little uncomfortable because they're like, this almost feels a little too cultish and real. Like, it's weird.
Yeah.
So I think
Right.
it was just really cool to see how they were able to get the buy-in from non-actors and how much that translates to the finished product and that fetishistic, cultish worship nature that we see from the War Boys. How about you?
Dude, yeah. I mean, it's just because you have literally thousands of people living in tent cities in the middle of the desert. There was very little civilization out where they were. There were a couple of smaller towns and villages around the area that it was very easy, apparently, for all these people to almost method act and stay in character throughout, because and kind of follow their roles and stuff like that. The stunt performers, as you were kind of talking about, as the War Boys, again, they would exist most of their time without shirts, very little clothing. They're out in the middle of the desert. Total wasteland. So yeah, it just kind of commanded a whole, following, cult following. And you have the stunt coordinator, Guy Norris, who was the stuntman for the Road Warrior and got his kind of start way back in 1981. He was in his mid 40s when he made this and did a lot of the stunts himself, a lot of the most dangerous stunts, namely flipping the cars as a couple of the car drivers and stuff. I think when I forget the big bulky bald dude, but when his car was flipping and then went through the archway and then the Doof Warrior's car crashed into that, he did that stunt practically. And then you have the Polecats.
Correct.
The poles swinging back and forth that were snatching the girls and Mad Max as well off of the war rig, along the desert path and stuff like that. Like that was all done practically. They got these Cirque du Soleil performers to do that. They had to figure out a whole way of doing that as far as like what material to use for the poles. That wasn't going to create too much buoyancy, the safest way to do it. They did tons of testing and were able to do all of that practically. So when you see these Polecats, lifting these people, including Zoe Kravitz, out of the truck and Tom Hardy as well, they're really doing all of that. So because they're doing a lot of this practically off of these cars, again, it was really easy to stay in character. What really kind of one of the things I thought was funny is Keys Byrne apparently was this. I've never really seen him in a whole lot else other than these films. He famously played the main villain in the first one, Toe Cutter, or one of the main villains. So I apparently he's described as kind of a big, lovable teddy bear hippie type. So you have this like crazy warmonger, dystopian dictator, and then you get him offset and away from character, and he's just like this lovable teddy bear that you want to just go up and give a hug. He is no longer with us, by the way, so rest in peace to Mr. Keys Byrne. But incredible final performance from him on this one.
Yeah, and it is funny. You do see that generally, right? I think that with actors, typically, for character actors anyway, typically the characters they play are sort of against their inherent nature, right? And that's probably why they're actors, because it's like, hey, look, I didn't get into acting to play myself, right? I wanted to play other people. So, like we see oftentimes these really nice guys playing these really horrible characters. And then vice versa, right? Sometimes like Mr. Charming ends up being a scuzzbag in real life. So
yeah,
but
touche.
But getting back to the narrative, we do see that Max and Nux have woken after the storm has subsided, and they soon find Furiosa and the wives. Max fights Furiosa and does end up getting control of the truck, but it turns out that there's a series of kill switches that only she knows the code to, the proper sequencing, and without it, Max is not going to be able to drive away. So they create a very necessary relationship, and they have to sort of use each other, and they're going to go ahead and jump on this war rig and see if they can make it work together, which, spoiler alert, they're going to be able to, but not without some consequences. Now, we also see that Nux has snuck onto the vehicle, and in doing so, he ends up attacking Furiosa, but is then doesn't succeed. And this is sort of a series of like, Nux is like one of those characters who just, gosh darn it, he tries so hard, but just can't seem to make it happen, right? He's always, he wants so bad to make Immortan Joe proud and just do something good for the War Boys and everything. And every single time he tries, he fails, but it's Nicholas Hoult, so you can't help but root for him. And so he's picked up by the War Boys convoy very soon after he gets thrown off. And this is the point where we see the war rig approaching a passage that's controlled by a biker gang. Now, Furiosa has agreed to trade fuel for safe passage. That's what that last trailer on the war rig is. But the gang soon reneges when they spot Immortan Joe's army, who is obviously after them and not very far away. They don't want to get us swept up in this. This wasn't part of the deal, right? But hey, sometimes these things happen. So they end up basically denying passage, but Furiosa ain't having that, so they're going to go ahead and take off anyway. The bikers blow the ridge, but not before the war rig is able to make it through, but this does block the path for Joe's army. So Joe, unable to use any of his larger vehicles, gets inside of a smaller vehicle and gets Nux on board. They cross over the destruction and are able to catch up to the war rig. And there's this really great moment where it's this like swelling hero moment where, Immortan Joe blesses Nux with the, I've seen this movie a dozen times, still don't know, silver meth mouth spray. I still don't know what that's. I know it's basically supposed to be a metaphor for the amphetamines that various armies would give their suicide bombers in World War II,
right,
and elsewhere. Yes. But I don't think it's ever actually, like, we never really find out like what this stuff is, how it's cultivated, where it comes from. Again, in a movie that's so devoted to giving everything backstory, I assume they have backstory for this and they just didn't communicate to us. And damn it, I want to know what it is. But either way, it's
to me, it was like huffing paint.
Sure, yeah.
If you need more information about that, paint on a stoop. Go back in our backlog. Link below.
Put some paint in the bag, a deep breath to the dome. Like the guy in Mad Max, I'm feeling shiny and chrome. Like marijuana.
This guy is plugging the back catalog today. Well done, sir.
Yes, we used to do fake commercials and comedy sketches. One of which I did is called Paint on the Stoop. And
we love them. You may not, but
it's
we love them.
It's a whole little ditty about huffing paint on the stoop and the things that entail. So yeah, I just like that in a wasteland like this, when you're trying to get a last minute high or to take yourself out of reality so that you can just kind of adrenaline fueled charge forward. What do you use? There's no drugs. There's no pharmaceuticals. There's no natural anything. So this is also a land of cars, gearheads, everything is metal and fuel and gasoline. So why not spray paint in your fucking mouth? I guess that's just right to the gums. Let's get that inhale that sweet fumes.
Probably
get last minute high to get all ramped up and go charge into battle. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
So I just kind of took it as like some Sherwin-Williams, good old-fashioned,
Sherwin-Williams, now selling meth.
Yeah, right.
And we just got a notice from legal. Apparently we are being sued by Sherwin-Williams.
Oh, great.
We apologize.
Yeah. Cool. Sounds good.
Yeah, they're upset. I'm sorry.
Cease and desist.
But again, it sets up this hero moment. He's going to go ahead and jump on the war rig. He makes it. He moves to attack. Looks like he's going to be able to do it, but then trips on his chains and falls, prompting Joe's favorite insult, the just crushing mediocre, right? Not even bad, just mediocre.
Yeah.
Yeah,
the worst. That's the worst.
Spectacular failure I can handle. Mediocre.
I would love to crash and burn over being mediocre or tepid. Yeah. Yeah. No one wants to be mediocre.
Yeah, but then less than mediocre is when his first of 5 brides, who is pregnant with his property, as he calls it, falls off the truck, and despite his best effort, Joe runs her over with the truck and kills her, and the child in her womb as well. Ryan, typically in an action film, one of the things you do not talk about is the acting, right? Maybe every now and then you get a charming Bruce Willis in the new Die Hard and everyone kind of loses their shit for a minute. But generally, or, you got a Schwarzenegger who's got this sort of oddly charismatic delivery that shouldn't work, but absolutely does, right?
Sure.
So, but in this case, this is an action film that has Tom Hardy and Charlize Theron, which most action films don't have that pedigree of actor, right? These are arguably 2 of the finest actors of their generation. So before I go ahead and go off on my stuff, what did you think of their performances?
Oh, they crushed it. Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely engaging. And again, To do it all with, we keep talking about this, so I'll just touch on it. But again, to do it all with very little to no dialogue, to do it all in the cab of a truck from the waist up. Mad Max is wearing a muzzle on his face, for lack of a better term, for the first 30% of the film, 20% of the film, up until he's able to get it off after the desert storm sequence, the sandstorm sequence. So, yeah, man, I mean, they were up against a lot. It's, very telling that you're able to feel for these characters. So something I kind of derived from or took away from this viewing of it and the deep dive of it all is how much the glue of their relationship and the heart of this story can oftentimes be found in Nicholas Holt's character, Nux, or the brides of Mort and Joe. So it's sometimes their reactions to things and how they're playing against these characters that will give them the opportunity to be vulnerable. I have my notes in here that everybody has the opportunity to be both vulnerable and strong at the same time, which is very rare. You don't necessarily see Vin Diesel get to be vulnerable in a film. It's very akin to, I'm glad you brought up Arnold Schwarzenegger, because, you get those moments, what makes Terminator 2 so memorable, aside from the huge action set pieces and all the cool CGI for its time, is the soft moments of Hasta la Vista, baby, in the car with John Connor, as, the Terminator is learning a different language and giving the thumbs up. It's those soft moments, he's a Terminator with a heart of gold, that makes that movie kind of stand out. Or even his protective nature of John Connor when he puts him on the motorcycle and then takes off down the LA River being chased by the T-1000 in a semi-truck bursting through, and you get to see, kind of feel empathy for that character who is just a robot. He's not talking much or saying much, but he's emoting a lot and he's speaking with his actions. And that's what we get here in Mad Max is you get Max and Furiosa and some of these characters because you have Nux along for the ride and his redemption tale from being one of the war boys to eventually sacrificing his life so that these other people can live. And then you see the vulnerability about his two tumors that he's got on his neck. What did he call them? Flotsam and Jetsam or Itsy and Bitsy
his
or something?
mates, Gary and Larry.
Gary and Larry, that's right. Yeah. So, you get these vulnerable moments that you see that Nux in his mind has the maturity of a little child. He's a teenager or a prepubescent boy. He was never given an opportunity to really live his life. And so when you see these soft moments and how Max or Furiosa come to trust their tale of redemption and all of that, I think it gives this film a lot of heart and allows these characters moments to be vulnerable in a tale that otherwise wouldn't have had that if they were just full steam ahead, on this war rig, just killing people and trying to save their own skin, Yeah. Sometimes vulnerability is more about how you respond to other people than it is to what you're doing in your own life.
Yeah. Hey, let me ask you this, because I just sort of considered this question. I sort of wonder, if you need to take a second to sort of think about it, that's cool. But like in every movie, we have a character that is presented that is there to act on behalf of the audience, right? And the audience's perspective on the story at hand. Yeah. Who do you think that character is in this movie?
So you're asking me who the character is in Mad Max Fury Road that's looking at the screen and thinking, holy shit. Because that's basically me as the audience. That's all I'm thinking the entire time as I'm watching this for the first time. Yeah. It might be Nux. Or maybe the wives. It could be the brides or the wives because they are, like Zoe Kravitz's Toast character, for example, is kind of the voice of reason. As we go through the film, she's the one that is always kind of breaking the bad news or, we've only got so many bullets for this gun and so many bullets for this gun. So what are you guys going to do? And then kicking it back to our main characters to figure it out. And so, the wives and Nux are the ones always kind of digesting and giving those moments to let the plot breathe for a second and kind of, giving some rationale and logic to an otherwise completely illogical and unrational situation of just traveling through the desert looking for a lush oasis of sorts. So maybe that, but that's a very good question. What are your thoughts on that? What do you think?
You know, it's funny. I was just thinking about it right now, and it's hilarious because it just goes back to what I was saying. I think it's Max, because you're like, you literally answered the question yourself. You're like, who's just sitting there like strapped to a chair with their eyes open going,
That's
holy
true.
shit, that's Max. The entire movie. He's a passenger
You're not
in his
wrong.
own film. It's insane.
You're right.
It's
Yeah.
and it's
Quite
so-
literally.
Yeah, and it's so funny to notice that this time around. Like, I've watched this film a dozen times.
Wow.
And it never occurred to me how passive Max is in his own story
Yeah.
for 2 hours. And so I
Right.
think it's Max. I think literally everybody else gets all the ham,
Wow.
all the meat,
You're right.
and Max is the distant passenger, just kind of
Yeah.
along for the ride. The way we
Yeah.
are. That's
Doing the
insanity.
best he can. Yeah.
To make sense of everything and take it all in, right? So
Yeah, I think that is his arc, because I think in
Sure.
the first act and a half, act and 3/4, that's his whole thing, is he is a passenger, quite literally, as Furiosa
Yeah.
is the driver, Nux is the driver. He's along for the ride. He's a prisoner for, a chunk of that. Like you said, strapped to the front saying, holy shit, as they're driving into a sandstorm. What are you guys doing? And then, he is forced to, or decide, makes a conscious decision to, by the third act, participate in the outcome
Yeah.
of his own story, and kind of take control and take charge, and seek redemption for his own failures, because it was because of those failures that, and being a passenger, that in his own story in previous films, that other people lost their lives, and he was haunted by his daughter and all of that. So that's his redemption. But he is, in fact, an ancillary character or a secondary character in this film. Absolutely.
yeah,
He
it's
is the
interesting.
audience for most of this movie. That's crazy. I never thought about that.
Yeah, one other thing I just realized right now, which I think is really interesting, is I'm thinking about it from a structural standpoint. And I think that because of the episodic nature of the way that George Miller tells the Mad Max stories, you said it before, it's like these aren't really sequential, like this happens after this in terms of 1, 2, 3, and 4. They're all just stories from the wasteland, right? And they happen in all sorts of different time periods. So I think because of that, it's almost as though the structure of this movie is more akin to television than it is to film. Specifically, what I mean by
Interesting.
that is it follows more of the Dan Harmon story circle, wherein a character sets out, things happen, and we end back where we belong, right? Having gone on a journey, as opposed to a traditional 3-act structure where the character is now this completely different person. Because although we do see a certain coming out of his shell with regards to the way that he is able to open up and basically regain his humanity and no longer be feral, the film ends with him just setting out to the wasteland on his own again. Like, we get back to the exact beginning of the story where he's just on his own and things happened. And from a 3-act structure standpoint, like, that happened to the people around him. But in terms of his specific arc, it's less an arc and more of a circle where he just ends up right where he started, having changed a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, they literally end up back at the Citadel again, right where they started. So
yeah, and
I also
he's back
love
out
that you
on his own.
referenced Dan Harmon's story circle and how he was able to actually visualize that on Rick and Morty with an actual story circle. I don't know if you ever saw that episode, but it's absolutely brilliant. It's one of my favorite episodes of Rick and Morty.
Yeah, absolutely. Now let's also talk about the fact that, the relationship between Tom Hardy and Charlize on set was not exactly a good one,
No.
it seems sort of, we know by now that Tom Hardy has sort of a reputation for being a little bit difficult of an actor. We also know that Charlize Theron is tough as nails and is not somebody you want to screw with. And so I just think that obviously when you put those two volatile combustible elements together, like, there's going to be some explosions along the way, right?
In the middle of the desert with all the hardships they were dealing with, the long shooting days, the freezing cold, because it gets freezing cold in the desert when the sun goes down. So
yeah, people don't realize that. Yeah, the desert weather is
extreme
weird.
Heat. Yeah, they're just dealing with all of it. So, even in the best of situations, I think that would have been a trying relationship, but this was not the best of situations at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And what is most interesting is I kind of there's this thing that I wonder about this, right? So first and foremost, let's get off the bat that like if we got to choose teams, like I'm Team Charlize all day long, right? Not just because she's gorgeous and a wonderful actor and Furiosa's the better character and richer and all of that, but just from the standpoint of like I would absolutely be just as pissed with him as she was if I was showing up every single day on time, ready to shoot at 7 or 8 a.m. And I have to sit there for 3 hours in the cab of a pickup in the middle of the desert under the hot Namibian sun, waiting for him to show up whenever the hell he feels like it. And once he strolls onto set at 11 a.m., we can start shooting. Like, nah, bro, like we would scrap too. You know what I mean?
Right.
I ain't having that,
I was a little confused by that. Like why he was, there are two sides to Tom Hardy because he notoriously loves his, he's like a big animal lover. He loves his dogs.
Yeah.
And, they travel with him and there's all this footage online you could find of him and his, loving his dogs and stuff. But so he seems like a very nurturing person by nature. I don't know what made him kind of a prima donna because this was early enough in his I think maybe that was it. Maybe he was just a young actor and a little naive. I think he's chilled out a little bit now, but this is long before, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this was before Dark Knight Rises when he was Bane, right? And then this is definitely before Venom.
Sure.
So I don't know where he, got the big britches to just think he was going to show up late and do whatever the hell he wants. Because meanwhile, Charlize had won an Oscar for Monster at this point.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know, where he got off to be that way. But there are stories that were in the book about, Charlize being definitely pissed off because he would show up whenever and make them wait and kind of had, a bit of a prima donna era, aura around him on set. But who knows? I did hear that, again, kind of conflicting, the two sides or the dichotomy of Hardy because the other side of it is the brides in this film, the wives, are wearing they're very scantily clad. They're wearing, linens, very, see-through or...
Yeah, pretty revealing outfits.
Correct. And so several actresses would say that, when they were doing the action stunts and action sequences around the truck, it was very common for something to be revealed or exposed and how bashful Tom Hardy was about it and how he wouldn't, point it out or look. He would just kind of like nod or wink or, kind of like make certain facial gestures to be like, oh, sorry,
got a little thing there, just
pop, just like, and they'd be like, oh, sorry, pop the titty out. So it was just he seems very boyish and charming by nature, and kind in some fashion, but also professionally speaking, a little more prima donna-ish and. I'm the star of this film. I think there were some elements they were talking about in the book. You may remember about him feeling a little insecure about being a side character in his own movie, a movie called Mad Max, where he was hired to be Max. He went and had a talk with Mel Gibson to get his blessing. He thought he was going into this to be this was going to be a Tom Hardy vehicle, no pun intended. And it ended up being, more of a Furiosa picture. And Charlize was the Oscar winner and all of that. So, a lot of attention, I think, was given to her and the women on set and stuff. And also just George Miller seems to be such a nice, caring, nurturing man. I have in my notes that he, strikes me as John Hammond from Jurassic Park. Just kind of like that kind old, this is what we're doing, and going through it. I created these dinosaurs.
He's definitely an Attenborough at heart for sure. He's the Australian Attenborough.
Yes. Yeah. Even so much as when he was going through to collect the money and put together his crew and get the camera people involved and casting, everything every single story fell in line with John Hammond in Jurassic Park going out to meet Sam Neill and Laura Dern. And, and he's popping their champagne and telling them, what we're going to do. This is great. Come with me. You'll see. And everything's going to be fine. Cut to everything not being fine at all. So velociraptors everywhere. So, I kind of envision maybe him taking more of a nurturing role with, and siding with the women and all of that. And even so much, and I'll kind of kick this back to you, when he invited Eve Ensler, who wrote the vagina monologues, to come out and really coach the women on what it was like to be victims of rape and dealing with Stockholm syndrome and being kept as property. Eve Ensler at the time, after writing vagina monologues, went to the Congo and was working with Congolese women that were dealing with this as victims, and women with dealing with PTSD, and trying to coach them to get back into society. And so, George Miller invited her on set to have these campfire talks and talk to the women, to give them their whole backstory. And, well, what would you, asking them questions like, would you fight back? Have you ever fought back before against this man? What do you think would happen when you did? And, how would that play out? And then what would that be like the next day when you woke up and you're still a victim? And now you have your freedom. What would that feel like? Would you be disoriented, or having never been free? And all of these things that really gave these women, the wives or brides, and even Charlize Theron's Furiosa, a lot of heart and backstory and depth that they could pull from or draw from in these emotional beats. All that to say, Tom Hardy didn't get any of that attention. So he was just kind of left to deal with his own grief and all of that on his own. So maybe there was some of that, on set too, where Tom Hardy's like, fuck you, this is a Mad Max movie kind of thing, like little chip on his shoulder. You know what I mean? What do you think? Did you get any of that out of the book or any of these stories? Do you think that kind of, am I onto something there, you think?
I would wonder if it really just all came down to a very specific method approach of, I'm willing to literally screw over this entire production and cost us an extra $30 to $50 million in reshoots and delays and stuff like that for the sake of authenticity. I don't know, but if he came out and said that, I would believe him. But I also understand.
I will say, apparently Charlize did break his nose in one of the action pieces, so she got hers rather. She got her digs in.
Definitely. Yeah. Sorry. Totally didn't mean that to happen. Fuck around again and find out. Let's go.
Yeah, my bad.
Now, narratively, at this point, Capable finds Nux, and he's hiding out, and he's really upset because he's failed, he's lamenting his failures. She comforts him, and then it turns to night, and they're being pursued by the bullet farmer. And the war rug has become stuck because it's the swampland that they're in. And it just so happens that as they're being attacked, there's a sniper rifle in the war rig that has exactly 3 bullets. Furiosa gives the rifle to Max, or else he takes it, I forget, and basically fires off 2 rounds, missing both times. Furiosa's like, yo, bro, let a professional handle this, sit back, takes the gun, even goes so far, I love these little touches, right, where she uses his shoulder for stability and like puts the gun on his shoulder, and then ends up firing into the spotlight that is on the front of the vehicle because it's the middle of the night. That's how they're able to see. And as it shatters, all of the glass shards fly into the face of the bullet farmer and end up blinding him. And, once he finds out he's blind, that's where we get this like super overwrought, like, I am the angel of death come to witness my vengeance type speech. And then just stands up and starts like spraying Uzis in both directions. Like the scene in Predator where they're all firing into the jungle, just like indiscriminate. And, so obviously. Yeah,
because he's wearing at that point, his eyes are blown out because of the everything. So he's wearing like a bandana or a scarf around his eyes. And he says something along the lines of, I am the scales of justice, and very much a scales of justice situation, but with guns instead of scales. So very visually appetizing. I'm just eating all this up with a spoon, by the way, at this point. And then, just in the world building sense, to show that no detail was left undone as they're going into this muddy region, the stilt walking people that they show in the foreground that they're driving past, and all the crows and ravens and stuff. Like, I just love all the attention to detail to flesh this whole thing out and make you feel like you're in a place. You know what I mean? Like I loved
Yeah.
the world building because ultimately you're in the middle of bumfuck nowhere desert, you know, and in this dystopian wasteland. But those little moments like that, like you feel like you're going into a new land or a new realm, in very much a video game-esque kind of way. Like I loved that. Again, kind of adding to the lore of what you're doing. Even so much so that apparently, you go into some of these places where the bullet farm is in Gastown and stuff like that in Furiosa. Apparently, we get to visit these places now in this new one prequel. So I'm very much looking forward to expanding that whole world and fleshing it out even further.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so much of this movie is the whole, like, that Shakespearean term and media res, where we start a story in the middle of it where stuff's already happening. Hamlet famously starts off that way. Most of his plays start off that way. And it's in the same respect, right? Like, this is a world that's lived in. So we're not going to start with the genesis of the creation of this world. Like, no, this world has existed for a long time. So, when we meet our heroes, right? Like, it's all this backstory has already taken place. So in that same respect, we see that with a lot of the ancillary creations, right? So, for example, like you talk about those people that are walking on stilts, and that's such a cool visual, but even still seeing this a dozen times, I have no idea who those people are. I have no idea what they are. I have no idea what they're doing there, but George Miller does, and his team does. And that's what makes this film is like all of these things are planned out, and it doesn't feel like it needs to give you everything. It's just like, this is part of this lived in, breathed in world that's reflective of the world at large. You don't know every person you see going down the street, like everybody sort of got their own story. All this stuff's going on. And so the way that the film reinforces this very lived in world by not feeling this need to bog you down in exposition for every single element that it introduces is a huge part of what makes it work.
Right. Agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah. And as the bullet farmer is sort of spraying all this ammo everywhere, Max is trying to weigh down a tree that the war rig is going to use to anchor itself and pull itself out of this swamp that it's stuck in. And so after he basically hides behind the tree, the weight enables the war rig to get out. We've got Nux and a couple of the other wives that are out there with Max making everything work. So as the vehicle gets going, they are able to escape the bullet farmer and his attacks. They're able to get in the war rig and make their way forward to the green place, seemingly, except that as they get there, on their way, they notice that there is a naked woman who is atop this large tower of sorts. Don't really know what this tower is. And the war rig stops. They notice it. She gives a holler, and it brings out these like 6 other women. And this is where Furiosa gets out and announces herself as a Vuvolini, which is the tribe that she grew up from, which I always want to call the Vuvuzela. But they are not the Vuvuzela, they are the Vuvolini. And and so she introduces herself, says, I'm the daughter of, XYZ person who was a Vuvolini. I was kidnapped when I was a kid, and I'm, trying to find this group and get the green place so that we can start life anew. And that's where they give her the unfortunate news that, hey, the green place no longer exists. The water went sour and it was poisoned. And as a matter of fact, that swampland that you were just in the scene before where you were getting hunted by the bullet farmer, that was the green place, or is what the green place was. And now it's just, again, poisoned and taken by ravens and these weird stilt creatures. And then that's, also where we set up the film's most emotional shot, which is that really nice sequence where Charlize walks off and, lets off her arm and drops to her knees and screams in the very slow motion. And interestingly, that moment was not in the script at all. That was another one where Charlize kind of was like, hey, this moment deserves a bit more than just like, oh, well, guess we better get on our way then, right? Like, which is kind of how it was.
Foiled again.
Foiled again. Yeah. No, I'll get you next time, Gadget. So
just fuck right off then, back into the desert.
Yeah, so they obviously came up with that, and I'm sure it's to the film's benefit. I think that's a shot that everybody remembers from the film. It's one of the most resonant shots. It's like that shot and then the Doof Warrior are like the two things everyone remembers.
Right.
Now, we've yet to discuss the sound and the score, Ryan, which are undoubtedly huge to the film's success, right? Anytime you have a kinetic action movie, if you don't have the right sounds right, the right sound production, if you don't have the right sound editing, this can all go to crap, right? Or it can at least lose a lot of that kinetic, visceral intensity that we get in this film when it's done effectively. So the first matter is we have the score, who is created by a gentleman named Tom Hokenborg, or as a lot of you guys might know him, Junkie XL. That's right, DJ Junkie XL, who has made the transition. I think if this wasn't his first, it was certainly one of the first of the scores that he did. Yeah, he's since gone on to do a couple more big, he's like a mainstream kind of guy. So he's done like Deadpool. He did Alita Battle Angel.
He's Zack Snyder's
Sonic
guy.
the Hedgehog movies. Yeah, and then he's Zack Snyder's guy, exactly. Army of the Dead and Justice League and all of that.
And all the DCEU movies and stuff like that, like Justice League and a bunch of those stuff. So
yeah, so, you know, and he's responsible for that main theme that we've heard remixed so many times with, you know, the choir and those like awesome horn blasts. And, you know, it really just sort of kinetically marries, you know, as sort of these traditional brass instruments that, you know, traditional scores would be used with, but then also introducing this kinetic electronic music sort of vibe.
Sure.
To great effect, right? Like it sounds exactly the way it should. But it's really the sound effects team that I would say are the ones that deserve all the credit here. You know, everything's so loud and so visceral, and yet you understand everyone completely. You know, even Max, who like is half mumbling most of his lines. And best of all, you don't have to sit there and ride the damn volume on your you know, sound bar there. You know, it's not like, oh, what are they saying? Let me turn it up. And then giant explosion like blows out your windows and you're like, geez, can you split the difference here? No, you just set your one volume. It's all mixed perfectly over the course of the entire film. When, you know, the score is big, when the score is small, you know, it's all so incredibly well layered. So, were there any sort of thoughts or insights you had specifically on either the score or the sound effects team or anything like that?
Well, again, just that, you know, it was crazy that because of the Doof Warrior, and his, you know, band of drummers that is behind him, there's, you know, I think like 8, you know, huge drums on the back of this truck with people in seats, you know, with giant mallets beating away at this. It allows a lot of the music to be diegetic. Because as this ragtag group of warriors are plowing through the desert, you know, this music is really happening. And there's this huge wall of speakers, like Grateful Dead style wall of sound back in the 70s that is projecting all of this. And so, yeah, it's crazy that not only we're hearing it, but Max and everybody, you know, it's meant to be terrifying and haunting throughout the way and aggressive. So, and pump all these people up. So it's fueling these action sequences, sure. But then also, you know, you get those swelling emotional beats like the sound design when Charlize is on her knees screaming at the sky and stuff like that. So it's equal parts adrenaline soaked and aggressive and, you know, just driving and pulsing, you know, again, with the beating of the drums and all of that. But it also has moments of tenderness and sensitivity as well through all of that. So, you know, some of Junkie XL stuff doesn't work for me. This whole thing worked for me. And certainly, I'm glad you brought it up, the sound editing and the sound design, because you can just set it and forget it on your sound levels. When it needs to be quiet, it can be, but you still can gather and derive the little bit of dialogue that there is in the movie still comes through and rings clean. So yeah, great work on this.
Yeah.
You know, I know that they recorded everything naturally on set, regardless if it was going to be used or not. You know, something you and I laughed about and we're texting about back and forth is how the guitar from the Doof Warrior actually had to work. So, you know, the thing was 80 pounds, shot flame, you know, 20 feet into the sky and huge pyrotechnics. It was made out of a bed, you know, the foundation of it is a bedpan that they found in the junkyard scrap heap. And they added all this shit to it. And then, you know, they went to go present it to George Miller for approval. He's like, great, I can't wait to hear how it sounds. And then everybody's looking at each other like, how it sounds? Like, oh, we got to play this thing? You're not just going to add in the music and post? He's like, yeah, no, it's going to be great. We got the speakers, you know. Just the fact that how much attention to detail and doing everything on set for reals even though it was all going to be ADR'd and rescored later.
Sure.
George Miller's, attention to authenticity and detail on set is just bananas.
Yeah.
Getting back to the visual design of this film, speaking of authenticity and all the work that went into capturing these things, not only in the sound, but also in the camera crews. There were, it blew my mind that there were 6 teams of 22 cameramen on all these war rigs and vehicles and things all along the way to capture all of this in real time, because they're performing all these stunts and doing all this crazy stuff. And because they're filming it sequentially, it's not like, oh, we'll go get this in a close up or we'll go pick this up or whatever. It's like, no, we're going to do this once, maybe twice, because in many cases they're wrecking these vehicles. And so they can only capture it once or twice. They've only got a couple of these things. It's not like they've got a fleet of these vehicles. So it's like, no, we got to capture that. We're going to have 6 camera teams, 22 cameras sprayed out everywhere. He did full auditions with the cameramen where he would put them on the war rig and audition them in a warehouse and film them filming Charlize or Tom Hardy or whatever to see how they were going to maneuver and like, how would you do it? They also were putting what are called edge arms, formerly known as Russian arms. They're basically a giant techno crane mounted on the top of a vehicle, usually a truck, with a gyroscopic gimbal at the very end of it. They end up shooting a majority of the film on that as we're roving through the desert. They were able to make use of that to get the movement and all of that without being so bouncy and jittery. So they were using edge arms, all these camera people and all these things. And so that's where, and all the, the stunt rigging throughout all of the cars as well, because some of these stunts are requiring these war boys to jump from one car onto a bed of spikes, for example, to sacrifice themselves. And the stunt rig would stop them literally inches away from sudden doom. So that is where pretty much, the CGI, the 20% CGI, they say that 80% of this film was filmed practically. 20% CGI is just matting out the stunt rigs, the camera people, anybody that wasn't supposed to be there. But the actual thing itself, pretty much all of it was real. And then, of course, Furiosa's cybernetic arm. She's wearing a green arm sleeve, and they replaced that with a robot arm later in the post-production. But yeah, it's just absolutely mind-boggling that how much, even down to the sound, was recorded on set. And then they would just go back and post and polish up and touch up what they needed to. It's just fucking mind-boggling what went into making this movie.
Absolutely, yeah. Now, as far as the film's concerned, we are approaching the end here. So we've got this whole reveal, and as a result, the women are going to just ride out into these salt flats, and it just kind of is like the end of the world, so to speak, or the edge of the world, rather, if you will. And Max basically convinces them that, there's nothing out there. Driving off, for days through this salt flat is definitely not the way to go. What we should do is we should turn around and we should go back to the Citadel, because right now Immortan Joe has everybody, all of his troops out chasing us. So the Citadel is entirely undefended. And that's really like the better move here. So let's go back and, get you guys there. And they agree. And so for the third act of the film, it's basically them with the women trying to get the war rig back to the Citadel before Immortan Joe and his army can catch up to them. But of course, they are able to meet up with them, and we have our final battle that ensues. And we see some of those older women that are kind of, jumping in and battling and helping against Immortan Joe's army. We've got Nux, who's entirely on the side of Max and Furiosa at this point, as well as the wives. And then, yes, to your point from earlier, that's when the Polecats are introduced, right? And when you're just thinking like, there's certainly nothing more they could do that hasn't been done, to outdo themselves, they find a way by introducing these Polecats. Very cool. I also think it's crazy just the amount of like, what do the kids call everything? Extra, right? Those kids with their everything extra, right? No, but like this film is like super extra in that respect, because even at the end, when they do defeat the army and like you get that huge wide shot of like all the truck exploding and everything, it's not enough just to have that. Miller's like, okay, so also we got to have Max on a polecat swinging from one side of the shot to the other while everything everything is blowing up behind him. And so like, just again, this film is so extra in the way that it's like, yeah, this is already above and beyond what anyone else has done, but I also can't help but over-engineer myself. Hey, maybe we have that in common with George Miller. Can't help but over-engineer everything that we try to do. But yeah, so, that's when, to your point, Toast is actually kidnapped from one of those polecats that's able to, use the tool or the implement, whatever you want to call it, to grab her from the vehicle. We also see Furiosa gets shot and she is bleeding profusely. She's getting very weak as time goes on. Joe's vehicle is actually able to catch up to the war rig, and that's where his son boards, Rictus, I believe they call him. He's like the giant muscly guy. He's like, I had a little baby brother and he was perfect. That guy. And so he ends up having a fight with Max. It's just like an old school fist fight, while Furiosa is able to catch up to Joe and actually kill him while saving Toast in the process. The surviving women are able to get onto Joe's car, and that's where we get our final sort of Nux is able to finally be the hero, right? But of course, because it's just the nature of the character that he's not going to be able to survive when he does it. So he's finally going to get his moment of being the hero. He's just not going to be able to stick around to actually see it and witness it. But in the respect that...
Witness it.
Exactly, right? I was going to say, but in the respect, like, he gets witnessed by everyone else, and thusly is able to get his glory of dying on the battlefield in the name of good. In this case, it's actual good instead of Immortan Joe, who we know is really evil. So he's able to sacrifice himself by crashing the war rig with Rictus on top, kills them both. As they're going back to the Citadel, Max is able to give Furiosa a blood transfusion, which really just brings the story full circle. It was so funny too. I just mentioned a little bit ago about the story circle. This is another one of those things. The movie begins with Max providing a blood transfusion to Nux and ends with him providing a blood transfusion to Furiosa. The first one against him with his will, and the second one very much in the spirit of giving, and also reflects his arc as well, where he rediscovers his humanity by the end of it. So they return to the Citadel. They show proof of Immortan Joe's death and are celebrated as they board the lift, seemingly preparing to take their place as the new rulers of the Citadel. Water is released to all the people by the mothers. And our final shot is of Max giving some eye contact, a little nod to Furiosa, and then disappearing back off into the crowd, into anonymity, to once again roam the wasteland in search of whatever he's possibly searching for, but really mostly just running away from the traumatic guilt of allowing his wife and daughter to die. So, we get a little bit of the happy ending with Furiosa and them taking over. But again, if you actually look at it as far as Max is concerned, like he doesn't really get any better. He didn't really attain anything. He didn't die, but that's really the best you can say about his arc. And he's really right back to where he started in terms of his search, but he has regained his humanity and is at least no longer feral, which is worth something. So, but again, that is the end of Fury Road. So Ryan, with that, as our film comes to an end, did you have any final thoughts, anecdotes, anything you want to discuss before we get on out of here?
Well, George Miller's wife edited this. I think a big reason why this film is a success is because of the editing.
Correct, yeah.
Tip of the hat to, was it Margaret Sixel, George Miller's wife, who absolutely crushed and gave us all the frenetic feeling and the high octane adrenaline rush that is this film. So congratulations to her on her Oscar. I know this film was, hoping to, it did win a lot of awards. So there were a lot of people that gave this film its flowers. And that it was, she was delivered 470 hours of footage that she had to suss through. That must have made some interesting dinner conversation in the Miller household when she'd come back from work and be like, so, how was your day? You want to hear how my day was? So, yeah, anyways, that was a whole ass thing. I know the Vuvolini, the women that played the Vuvolini, spoke very highly in the book that we read about how important this was to them, because all the roles that they're offered as older women are of older women being feeble and in homes or being taken care of or being weak. So the fact that they were these motorcycle riding desert dwelling badasses that fire guns and save the day and sacrifice themselves in the heat of battle, was really awesome representation for them, and gave them an awesome way to kind of bow out of their careers and retire. So that was dope. I know to go back and do some of the reshoots to fill out with all of the extras, they had to hire homeless people apparently. And all these people were like super stoked to come on set and be taken care of and participate. They were, given great treatment, but yeah, they had to bring in a lot of homeless people from Australia because they did a lot of the reshoots for the beginning and the end of the film to kind of flesh the whole thing out. So I thought that was kind of interesting that George Miller was like, what do you mean you can't find extras? Like, I'll get you extras. You want me to get you some extras? I'll get you this. So rounded up all these homeless people and put them to work and gave them good treatment and paid them for their time and so forth. It was not an exploitative thing, which is awesome to hear.
Yeah. And on that note, real quick, I'll just interrupt real quick and just point out that on that note, for anybody watching that didn't know, so they being Warner Brothers, did not allow George Miller to shoot his opening and closing scenes because those were the two last things he was going to do. And they're like, you're way over budget. Like, you don't get to film those scenes. And so as a result, he's like, my movie doesn't make sense because like nobody has any idea what's going on. Like wasn't able to set it up and I wasn't able to close it. So a lot of those bookended scenes that we see at the beginning and end with all of those people that represent the denizens of the Citadel. Yeah, like those almost didn't exist. And so that's why they had to go back and basically scramble and hire non-actors to fill in because it was like, okay, like they like the movie enough that they gave us this, but we got like however many days. So just get it filled and let's get it going. So very much had to scramble, and that's where a lot of that came from, why they had to do that specifically with hiring the homeless people as opposed to actors.
Did you see that in some of the behind the scenes on the disc? Apparently in very, very, very early versions of, I don't want to call it the script because there's no script, but of the story, the water was supposed to be potatoes. And Morton Joe is holding back all the potatoes from the people.
Oh my God. The visual of him like pushing the levers forward and all these potatoes just dropping on the people is hysterical. That's like one of those internet things where people like doctor like movies to make it look different. Or like where the videos where they put the cat into Titanic playing the Kate Winslet character. It's just like Mad Max, but the water is potatoes. Go.
So if you're out there and you have some way of making that happen, adding potatoes in lieu of the water.
It would be so hysterical because it's so high up that the potatoes are like injuring people because they're falling. And everyone's like, oh God, no, it hurts. Please stop with the potatoes. They become
projectiles.
But we need them because we're starving.
Yep, absolutely.
Potatoes.
Yep.
Gotta love George Miller.
Instead of Warren Joe, they could have called him Spuds McKenzie.
I love that George Miller exists. He's a wonderful man.
They should have called him Spuds
McKenzie. Well, I think that's a perfect way to go ahead and go out. So yeah, we'll go ahead and wrap up here. Just before we move on to our final 3 adjectives and star rating, do want to mention that if you haven't yet, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. Really helps us out. As well, if you liked this review, hated this review, or anywhere in between, please, by all means, go ahead, leave us a comment. Go ahead and reach out to us, esotericacinema@gmail.com. Go to the website. We would love to hear from you, and we'll be happy to respond. So yeah, we'll go ahead and move on to our final feature, 3 adjectives here, which we do at the end of all of our reviews, where we give you 3 adjectives that summarize our response to the film. So Ryan, even though you always end up stealing mine, still going to go ahead and let you go first. 3 adjectives for Mad Max Fury Road. What you got, homie?
Oh, I think you're safe on this one. I'm going to start off with barn burner because this is a barn burner. Normally that's used to describe something that's very energetic and just crazy, but also it's your barn. So there's a lot of heart in this. So even though it's an action film with a little bit of heart because I feel like you're watching your barn burn a little bit. And then my second one is Scientology because the more you find out about this movie, the crazier it all seems. And it's just wildly unrealistic that any of this is true. But yet everybody behind the scenes is treating this absolutely dead fucking serious. So as much as Scientology could be these wild ideas thought up by this literary fiction writer, But, you know, everybody's like, no, there's totally Thetans, bro. And we're going to make a whole thing and it's going to make a lot of money. And so this is definitely the Scientology of movies. And my last one is Child in Vegas, because much like taking your newborn child to Vegas, I am just wild-eyed, starry-eyed, sensory overload. Holy crap, what am I seeing? Just kind of loose-necked, staring around at everything, taking it all in. The sights and sounds of it all are bananas. So Barn Burner, Scientology, and Child in Vegas. I didn't steal yours, did I, Jason?
No, you absolutely did not. Especially because you put like so much more thought into them, right? Like I wanted to come up with sort of like just 3 words that made one headline. So Ryan gave you a few minutes there. I'm just going to go straight through mine. Also, we're well over 2 hours here, so we can go ahead and move on. My 3 adjectives are kinetic, unbelievable, action masterpiece. If you ask me, describe this movie in one phrase, I would say it is a kinetic and unbelievable action masterpiece. So summarizes my response. For our star rating, I don't think this is going to surprise anybody. I have got a big fat 5 stars out of 5. I would give it 7.5 if I could. Ryan,
sure.
How about you?
5 big old potatoes, buddy. Absolutely.
Yeah, so, obviously, again, this is, highly regarded for a reason. Arguably the best action film of all time. Easily Ryan and my personal favorite action films of all time. And that's beating out some stunners like Predator. Like I was trying to think of what are my 2 and 3. Probably be like Predator and Terminator 2. I don't know if Jurassic Park counts as an action film strictly or if it's an adventure. That'd be top 5 if it does count as an action film.
This is kind of an adventure too. Like there were moments where I was kind of comparing this to like a modern dystopian Indiana Jones, if you want to think of it that way, something along those lines. Where Indiana just gets beat to shit throughout the entire film, dragged through dirt, beat up, kind of ends up right back where he started from most times. So, this is, but it's one of the best versions of those things. And it's certainly a modern classic, which is a weird thing to say because usually classics, I'm using air quotes, is, that's judged by time, right? Like time is what makes a classic or dictates what a classic would be. And this is a modern classic. What does that, that's a rarity. But this is, to me, right up there with like Lawrence of Arabia. Like, I know that sounds like a stupid thing to say, but it is so brilliantly done. And all the love and care that went into making this. You hear all these behind the scenes stories of Lawrence of Arabia, how they would go out and sweep the sand between each take because they didn't want footprints left behind or any traces that they filmed the last take. So just all the work that went into filming that, dealing with the dust, the sand and everything, just all of that. That's all present and on full display in hyper saturated orange and teal and Mad Max Fury Road. Loved every friggin' minute of it.
Absolutely. So because this is sort of like a special one-off here, we're not going to do our usual random movie selection at the end. We have got The Square coming up for you next. That would have taken this place here, but we just, after reading that book, we couldn't help but want to do like a full-fledged deep dive on Fury Road because we love the film so much and there's so much there. So we really hope that you enjoyed our review of Fury Road. Hopefully you learned a little bit more about why you love the film if you've seen it before. If not, I mean, I don't know what you're waiting for at this point. Like, we certainly haven't told you anything that millions of other people haven't said. So do go watch it.
And check out the book.
And check out the
Blood,
book.
Sweat,
That's
and Chrome
right.
by Kyle Buchanan. Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah, it's a wonderful, whether you read it or you listen to it in an audiobook, you're going to learn a ton. You're going to hear a lot of these stories that we told you, but a ton more that we also left out. So once again, for myself, Jason Peters, and my man, Ryan Siebold, this has been Esoterica Cinema. Thank you so much for joining us. Enjoy the movies.